We're going in 3, 2, 1.
Yo, what is going on, everyone? Tay here. Okay, so gonna start this video off with a bit of a preamble. So here's the deal. I've been super busy at the beginning of this month, just like I was at the beginning of last month. So there's been all this MCU news that's come out over the past 2 weeks that I haven't had a chance to talk about yet. So I've been working on this long video that was just going to cover all of the new Avengers and Fantastic Four news that I hadn't gotten a chance to talk about yet over the past few weeks. And then as I was working on it, it turned into like this hour and 45-minute video. And I was like, well, that's not going to work. So what I'm going to talk about in today's video, which is mainly some new Scarlet Witch updates, was originally part of that video. And then I had to edit that out. I'm like, why don't we just make this its own thing? And look, originally I wasn't planning on talking about the Scarlet Witch at all because I did talk about her in the last video. But then some pretty big updates and reveals have come out since that last video that I felt was really important to talk about that could mean that the Scarlet Witch is the most important character in the entire Multiverse saga. So it did feel kind of pertinent to talk about. So yeah, today we're going to talk about the Scarlet Witch and her role in the Multiverse saga and the upcoming Avengers movies. And then the next video, which I'm editing now, will come out tomorrow or the next day and is really going to dig into a bunch of Avengers Secret Wars stuff, including Doctor Doom. And I'm just going to say it might end up being the longest video I've ever done. I'm not sure on that. I'm not sure what the record is so far, but this might break it. So yeah, keep an eye out for that to drop tomorrow or the next day. And one of the other things I'm going to talk about in today's video, and I'm also going to talk about in the next video, is that Avengers and Fantastic Four concept art that dropped online earlier this month. Because I haven't had a chance to talk about that yet, and since that concept art came out, a lot of you guys have hit me up and said, hey, you're going to talk about this, right? This seems like a big deal. And I am going to talk about it a little bit in today's video and more in the next video. It's not all we're going to talk about, but I'm going to sort of use it as a jumping off point. And because Marvel Studios pulled this art offline so quickly, I am going to throw some little image overlays over the art just to kind of interrupt it. Now, you'll be able to see the images fine, but I just want to play it safe so I don't get my video claimed. And I should also throw out a quick potential spoiler warning for the Fantastic Four and the upcoming Avengers movies, because this concept art does reveal some potentially pretty spoilery details. And I should also just say that the Russo brothers were recently asked about this concept art in a recent interview, and they said that this concept art was not legit. And that is frankly ridiculous because we know for a fact that this concept artist, I can't pronounce her name, but we know that she works for Marvel Studios or has worked for Marvel Studios on past projects like She-Hulk, Ms. Marvel, and Loki. So we know she's worked for the company. And also because within an hour of this art going viral after she posted it to her ArtStation profile, Marvel Studios had her entire ArtStation profile pulled off the internet and it's still down. So we know that this artwork was legitimate, and we also know that Marvel Studios and the Russo brothers have lied on numerous occasions in the past to avoid discussing spoilers in interviews. Now, I don't want to go off on all of this too much because, again, like I said, I'm going to talk about this a little bit again in the next video, but that is all kind of necessary background information to put out there before we get into this concept art. So yeah, we have to take it with a grain of salt, but at the same time, I do think it's still a pretty big deal about some of the different concepts, characters, and overall ideas and scope that Marvel Studios are going for with the upcoming Avengers movies. And when this concept art first went viral online, everyone was saying it was for Avengers Doomsday, but considering that the concept art all looks like it is showing different depictions of Battleworld, I think that all of the Avengers images are actually concept art for Avengers Secret Wars and not Doomsday. So yeah, that's the last thing I'll say about that before we get into it. But one last thing, make sure you watch until the end of the video because we do have super thanks questions to get to. So watch until the end of the video, and remember that if you would like to leave a super thanks with a question or a comment on this video, that those are always greatly appreciated and that I will read and respond to those in the next video.
Look, as fans of the comic know, Secret Wars is incredibly ambitious. World-colliding epicness.
Yeah.
All of this made Joe and I understand that we would need to make another essential movie first in order for all of us to be ready for Secret Wars.
All right, so like I mentioned in the intro, while I mainly want to talk about the Avengers stuff, included in this batch of concept art were also images for Fantastic Four First Steps that included a bunch of images featuring Franklin Richards. And I just wanted to bring this up and point that out real quick, because this does seem to confirm or at least heavily imply a lot of what we discussed in the last video about Franklin playing an important role in not just the plot of the Fantastic Four, but also in the plot of the upcoming Avengers films. And I only mention this because we also happen to see Franklin Richards included in one of the more significant Avengers images where we see him standing beside Doctor Doom. And the file name of this image was Royal Court, where we see a depiction of God Emperor Doom surrounded by his loyal subjects in a scene that appears to be a direct adaptation of these panels from the Secret Wars comic. And the other big characters you'll notice in this artwork is we have Doctor Strange, who is standing beside Doom as his sheriff, along with Yelena, and who I'm pretty sure is Star-Lord, who appear to be working for Doctor Doom because Yelena is presenting him with Reed Richards, who is in chains being held captive down on his knees before Doom. And then standing to Doctor Doom's left, we also see a young kid and a woman. And it's kind of hard to tell exactly who the woman is supposed to be, but my best guess is that it's meant to be either Sue Storm or Wanda Maximoff. Because while Sue Storm was Doctor Doom's wife in Battleworld in the comics, if you zoom in and take a close look at this image, it actually looks more like it could be Elizabeth Olsen than Vanessa Kirby. And if you've watched some of my recent videos, you know that I've been discussing some of the different reports out there regarding Wanda Maximoff potentially taking on the role as Doctor Doom's romantic partner in the upcoming Avengers films, and that she could actually replace Sue in that role of being Doom's significant other in these movies. And look, I know I just discussed this whole Doom-Wanda romance thing in the last video, but there is just a recent update that just came out that I do need to touch on real quick. Because the Russo brothers' new family movie, Electric State, just dropped on Netflix. And in the movie, there's actually an Avengers Scarlet Witch Easter egg that's pretty interesting. Because during one of the scenes in that movie, we see one of the robots in this dilapidated comic book shop, and he's actually reading an old issue of Avengers West Coast. And on the cover of this issue, which is issue 56, we see a depiction of Wanda holding several of the Avengers in her hand with a banner that boldly claims, "The Witch is back." And I did read this West Coast Avengers comic run back when WandaVision was happening, but that was quite a while ago, so I didn't remember it very well, so I went back and read this issue and some of the other issues around it to kind of remind myself of what was going on with Wanda at this time, to see if there might be any significance to why exactly the Russo brothers chose this specific comic as an Easter egg in their new movie. Because don't get it wrong, with this being the last movie that the Russos made before gearing up for Avengers Doomsday, I don't think there's any chance that this was just a random Easter egg that doesn't hold some kind of greater significance. And after going back and reading this story again, I honestly came to a whole new conclusion about Wanda's role in not just the upcoming Avengers movies, but really the Multiverse Saga as a whole. And I think that the conclusion I came to may be what the Russo brothers are teasing with this Easter egg. Because this issue of West Coast Avengers 56 is the beginning of a story called Darker Than Scarlet that was a part of the Dark Scarlet Witch saga that was written by John Byrne. And the Russo brothers have actually talked a lot about John Byrne in the past, saying that he was their favorite comic book writer when they were kids in the 80s, and how they grew up reading his Xmen, Avengers, and Fantastic Four comics. And this John Byrne Darker Than Scarlet story later got sequels that were directly connected to this saga, with comic runs like Avengers Disassembled, House of M, and The Children's Crusade. Because this story takes place shortly after Wanda lost her twin boys, Tommy and Billy, to Mephisto, and it was also shortly after she lost Vision and he was reassembled into the White Vision. And because of all the trauma that this caused her, Wanda ended up falling into this catatonic state and eventually was taken away by her father, Magneto. And after she awoke, she was more powerful than ever, but she also seemed to be a different person as she was now full of rage and blamed the Avengers for not doing enough to help protect her and her children and Vision. So, by Magneto's side, Wanda turned against the Avengers and used her powers to reshape their reality. Now, where this gets kind of interesting is that years later in the stories that followed, like the Children's Crusade, it was later revealed that Doctor Doom also had a hand in pushing Wanda in this dark direction way back then as a means towards his eventual greater plans to steal her powers. However, there was another character that was more directly involved with manipulating Wanda back during the time when this story was happening, and that character was Immortus, the future variant of Kang. And what ends up being revealed is that Immortus has secretly been influencing Wanda's path through time as a means to use her power as a vessel for the time stream so that the two of them can build an empire together at the end of time and basically rule over the multiverse. Because with Wanda being a Nexus being, Immortus knew that she was one of the only characters who was powerful enough to actually make this plan happen. But before his plan could come to fruition, Agatha Harkness showed up and ended up breaking Wanda free from Immortus' influence, and with the help of Wonder Man, Wanda eventually became her old self again and rejoined the Avengers. Now, considering that this story has this distant Doctor Doom connection that would be revealed later on down the line with the Children's Crusade, that already makes it an interesting connection to everything we've been talking about regarding Doom and Wanda's romance in the upcoming Avengers films. However, considering that the Russos specifically chose the Darker Than Scarlet comic to be the Easter egg in this scene in Electric State, the other thing that really stands out to me is that the Darker Than Scarlet story, and really this whole John Byrne era of the West Coast Avengers comics, has already had a pretty considerable influence over the events of the Multiverse saga. Because for one, John Byrne's whole Dark Scarlet Witch saga from this West Coast Avengers era has already been a huge influence over Wanda's story arc in both WandaVision and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. However, Immortus' story in those John Byrne's comics were also a huge influence over He Who Remains' story arc in Loki Season 1, with the backstory of how He Who Remains conquered the multiverse. In fact, Michael Waldron even talked about this in past interviews, in how when he was writing Loki Season 1, he decided to merge He Who Remains from the comics with Immortus' story from the comics, specifically this John Byrne run when Immortus was working with the Timekeepers. And over the past few months, there's been some reports that have been coming out regarding what Marvel Studios' original plans were for Avengers 5 before they pivoted away from Kang to Doctor Doom. And what's come out in some of those reports is that originally, Marvel Studios was planning on revealing that Immortus was going to be the one who was responsible for writing the Darkhold based on the ancient scribes from Chthon, and that he was actually the one who had secretly been guiding Wanda's path through time to her becoming the Scarlet Witch, because he ultimately planned on using her powers as the Scarlet Witch to help him take over the multiverse. And if this would have happened, then this would have obviously been a pretty direct adaptation of John Byrne's Dark Scarlet Witch saga and everything I just went through. So when you take that into consideration, on top of the fact that this John Byrne saga was also a big influence on WandaVision and Loki, which were the first two projects to come out in Phase 4, it seems like this John Byrne saga may have been one of the biggest comic influences over the Multiverse saga as a whole, and why Wanda is one of the most important characters in this saga. And when you look at it that way, it does make it much more interesting that this comic was the one that the Russo brothers decided to include as this Easter egg in their new movie. Because one of the things that the Russo brothers said in one of their recent interviews is that one of the big things they want to do with the upcoming Avengers movies is they want to tie together a lot of the more important elements of what's happened in the Multiverse Saga to make a more cohesive through-line story to then culminate in the upcoming Avengers films. So basically they want to look back at the Multiverse Saga and find those elements that are the most important and tie that all together into the story they are telling as a culmination event with their upcoming Avengers films. So even though Marvel Studios has now pivoted to Doctor Doom, this makes me think that this John Byrne story is still extremely important to everything that's going to happen, and that Wanda isn't just going to be very important in the upcoming Avengers films, but that she is also perhaps the most important character in the entire Multiverse Saga. Because remember, in both WandaVision and Multiverse of Madness, there were scenes that revealed that there is this Scarlet Witch prophecy that says that the Scarlet Witch is destined to either rule or destroy the cosmos.
It's your destiny to destroy the world.
Scarlet Witch is a being of unfathomable magic and is prophesied to either rule or annihilate the cosmos.
And I mean, I think that those two scenes right there should be big enough hints that Wanda is one of the most important characters of this saga and will play an absolutely huge role in the upcoming Avengers films. And as I've said before, I still think that a lot of those earlier story ideas from the Kang Dynasty and when Kang was still meant to be the main villain are still going to be used in Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars, but that a lot of those elements will just be rolled into Doctor Doom's overall plan instead of Kang, Immortus, and any of the other Kang variants. And whenever I've discussed this idea that Wanda could be romantically involved with Doctor Doom in the upcoming Avengers movies, I've always said that if that happens, it will likely be because Wanda has lost her memories due to what happened to her at the end of Multiverse of Madness, and that Doom would likely be manipulating her to keep her that way as a way for him to use her and her powers, just like we saw in the Children's Crusade comic run. And that's not to say that Doom and Wanda couldn't also truly end up falling in love, because they did fall in love in the comics. It's just to say that even if they do fall in love, that will still come second to Doom's greater desire for power and to rule over the multiverse. Which I know a lot of you Wanda stans out there might hate this whole idea, because you might think that this means that we are going to see Wanda as a villain once again. But I actually don't think that would be the case, because if we do see Wanda in a relationship with Doom, I think she'll probably be portrayed more like Susan Storm was in the Secret Wars comic, to where she will be mostly unaware of Doom's darker side and will truly believe that he is the hero and the savior of the multiverse. In fact, one of the reasons that I think that Wanda could potentially be one of, if not the most significant character in the entire Multiverse Saga, is because in the end, I think that she will probably be the one who is largely responsible for defeating Doom and saving the multiverse, and that she could play a huge role in rebuilding the multiverse with Franklin Richards. So yeah, basically I guess this has all just been a long way of saying that I think that this West Coast Avengers Easter egg that the Russo brothers placed in Electric State is at the very least meant to be a hint at the return of the Scarlet Witch, but that it might be hinting at something much, much bigger, signaling that the Darker Than Scarlet story could be a pivotal comic run in understanding where things are going with the upcoming Avengers films, but rather than Wanda teaming up with Immortus to rule the multiverse, it will instead be Doctor Doom. Which, then taking this back to this concept art we've been talking about, again, I'm not saying that this is for sure meant to be a depiction of Wanda Maximoff standing besides Doctor Doom, but I do think that that would make sense, and this woman does appear to have more reddish hair instead of blonde hair, and I do think it looks more like Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda than Vanessa Kirby as Sue Storm. However, with the kid we see in this art, I definitely think that that is meant to be Franklin Richards. And this is a big deal because, for one, it definitely adds a lot of credence to the theories I discussed in the last video where I was talking about how Franklin could play a huge role in Doctor Doom's overall plan, which could basically be to get Franklin away from his parents and use his reality warping powers to create a new universe. And this actually leads me into what I want to talk about next, which is a little bit more about some of what we saw in that new concept art, and also some really telling comments made recently by the Russo brothers that could tie into some really big aspects of what's going to happen in Avengers Secret Wars regarding Wanda and mutants. So let's move on and talk about that.
Well, as you said, I mean, it has already started, and certainly Deadpool Wolverine was the biggest yet. I think you will see that continue into our next few movies and some Xmen players that you might recognize. And then right after that, the whole story of Secret Wars really leads us into a new age of mutants and of the Xmen.
Alright, so like I said earlier, I don't want to spend too much time talking about this concept art in today's video because I am going to discuss it more in the next video. But some of the more fun images we saw in this batch of concept art was this one, where we see Vision and Peter Quill in some kind of house or apartment, just chilling, eating pizza and drinking. And this image was saved under a file name that suggests it is for the upcoming Avengers movies, and it was titled as Quill and Vision Bonding. And then the other image that was also similar to this, that was also saved under a name that would suggest that it's for one of the upcoming Avengers movies, was this one that's simply titled as Bar Scene, where we see Wong, Quill, and several of the Young Avengers all chilling in this tavern that looks like it's some kind of mix of Star Wars meets Game of Thrones, all hanging out having drinks. And there's even a little cameo of Dupe over to the right. And one of the things that's interesting about this image in particular is that it also features a depiction of Tommy Shepard, Billy's brother, who we know he was going off to search for at the end of Agatha All Along. And obviously, we don't know that all of these characters are necessarily even going to be in Avengers Doomsday or Secret Wars, but it does seem to suggest that they are at least characters that are on the menu. Because Kevin Feige has already went out of his way to tell fans not to expect every character from the Multiverse Saga to appear in these upcoming Avengers movies, and that only characters that are central to the story will be featured. And at first, you might not think that some of these Young Avengers would be characters that would be central to the plot of the upcoming Avengers films. However, if Wanda is going to be one of the most important characters in these Avengers movies like we've been talking about, then I do think it would make sense for the characters that are closest to her to also be featured in the movie as well, because part of their story arcs could be trying to reach Wanda to help break her free from Doctor Doom's influence and help her regain her memories, very similar to what we saw in the Children's Crusade comic. Because in Children's Crusade, when Wanda lost her memories and was engaged to be married to Doctor Doom, it was actually Tommy and Billy, especially Billy, who were able to reach out to her and make her remember who she really was and to break free from Doom. And then one of the other things I wanted to touch on in this video was I wanted to talk a little bit about mutants and the possibility of it potentially being revealed that Wanda could actually be a mutant like she was in the comics. Because in one of their recent interviews, the Russo brothers also said that one of the ways that these upcoming Avengers films will be different from Infinity War and Endgame is that those movies were about ending a story, and that these movies are about beginning a story. And obviously what I think this is a reference to is the introduction of mutants into the Prime MCU timeline and the soft reboot of the MCU. And, you know, another reason why I think that Wanda could be revealed as potentially the most important character of the Multiverse Saga is because I actually think that Wanda could be directly involved in both the introduction of mutants and the soft reboot of the MCU. Because at this point, I think we all know that the soft reboot of the MCU is not going to rewrite the past history of the MCU as much as it is going to add to it by introducing new elements into the Prime universe, like mutants, the Fantastic Four, and potentially even other changes like new characters such as perhaps the newly recast Black Panther. And the two characters that I think will likely be responsible for resetting the multiverse in order to establish this updated version of the MCU are most likely going to be Franklin and Wanda, you know, kind of similar to how it went down at the end of the Secret Wars comic when Franklin, Reed, and Owen Reese all worked together to reset the multiverse. However, once the multiverse is reset in the MCU, there still presumably needs to be a reason for how and why mutants will now become a part of the MCU 616 universe. Because Kevin Feige himself has said that the Secret Wars movie will lead into a new age of mutants in the MCU. So, you know, exactly how is that going to happen? What are the details behind how that's going to work? Well, if Franklin is going to be the one who uses his power to recreate the MCU 616 universe, then perhaps Wanda will be the one to actually shape it. That by using her powers to manipulate reality, that she and Franklin could recreate the MCU 616 universe together. Therefore, you could have Franklin kind of providing the raw material and Wanda being the one making the decisions to kind of shape that material into this new reality that is mostly the same as how it was before, but with a few key changes. Because what I could potentially see happening at the end of the Secret Wars movie is something that would be kind of similar to what happened in the House of M comics, to where we could see Wanda as the one who makes the decision to reshape the MCU 616 universe, with mutants and the X-Men now being included in that as if they were always a part of its history. Now, obviously, if something like that happens, it would still leave the question of why would Wanda do that? You know, what kind of connection would she have to mutants to where she felt like it was necessary to include them in this new universe? Because up to this point, Marvel Studios has never associated Wanda with mutants or hinted that she could have some kind of mutant lineage. But with mutants now being around the corner and the next saga likely being the Mutant Saga, on top of the reports we've heard that Wanda will go on to have a big role in the Mutant Saga, perhaps that is something that will change with the upcoming Avengers movies, and that at some point in those films, part of Wanda's character development will be revealing that she really is a mutant and does have mutant heritage, just like we saw in the comics, and that this could be what leads to her making this decision to add mutants into the history of the MCU 616 universe. Now, of course, just speculation, throwing out different hypotheticals, but we have heard that Wanda is going to have a huge role in the next saga and that she will potentially be getting her own solo movie, and that there will continue to be spin-offs of characters and different projects that are connected to Wanda. I mean, we've even heard rumors about there being a whole interconnected West Coast Avengers mini-arc in the next saga that could revolve around Wanda and different characters like Wonder Man and Vision and Agatha and all that. So yeah, with the next saga revolving around mutants on top of the fact that Wanda could have this huge role in the upcoming Avengers films and having a big role after that in the next saga, I do think that making her the one who's responsible for mutants existing in the new 616 universe would make sense, and that tied to that, it would also make sense for her to finally be revealed as a mutant in the MCU. So yeah, you guys let me know what you think, because as I've said, even though we could see Wanda working with Doctor Doom in the upcoming Avengers movies, I think the only reason Marvel Studios would do that is to set her up to have this huge redemption arc moment to where she could be one of the biggest heroes of not just these Avengers movies, but for the multiverse and the multiverse saga as a whole, and completely setting up where everything goes afterwards. So yeah, you guys let me know what you think in the comments down below, and please like and share the video if you enjoyed it. That always helps out a lot. But don't go anywhere just yet, because we do still have super thanks to get to. So let's get to those.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so let's jump into these super thanks, and right off the bat, we have 2 from Gator Chris and 1 from Paul Sanford. Thank you very much, Chris and Paul. Appreciate it as always. And then we also have 1 from Blackfire Warrior, and this one says, All these great new vids are an early birthday gift for me. Keep it up, Tay. As an aside, I think Galactus is looking mighty weathered in the Fantastic Four trailer. He may be near death, seeing that he's that size and finds Franklin as his only way to survive. Yeah, that's definitely possible. I think they, are going with that weathered look just to kind of add texture, because that's an important part of any of these characters, is to kind of make sure there's a lot of texture so it looks realistic on screen. And what I heard about Galactus is that Marvel Studios are going with a mix of Jack Kirby's Galactus artwork and H.R. Geiger, which sounds awesome. And just from that one shot we see in the trailer, that's exactly what it looks like. Then next, we also have 5 from Henry Lopez, and this one says, with the MCU headed to multi-universal war, who do you want cast to play members of the Squadron Supreme? I know it's unlikely, but I'd love to see former DCU actors battle the current MCU roster, even if it's a brief cameo, much like the Xmen cast during Deadpool 2. And yeah, I know there were a lot of rumors about the Squadron Supreme showing up in Avengers 5 when it was still titled Kang Dynasty, but we haven't heard any rumors about that for a while, so I don't know how likely it is that they'll show up. But I do think it would be pretty cool to see Henry Cavill play Hyperion. So yeah, thank you for that, Henry. Then the next one we have is 5 from One Fat Cat, and this one says, what snacks are you going to have, or did you have, when you watched Daredevil Born Again season openers? Also, did you, like me, do a rewatch of the first 3 Daredevil seasons and 2 seasons of The Punisher? And as far as Daredevil, I did not do a full rewatch of the entire series because I've seen it a few times over the years. However, not too long ago, I did rewatch season 3 to kind of prepare. And then a few months ago, I also watched Punisher season 1 because that is one of my all-time favorite comic book projects of all time. I love season 1. Season 2 is a bit of a disappointment, but season 1 is like top tier. And I will just say, since I haven't talked about it since the show has started airing, that I am really loving Daredevil Born Again so far. I do not get some of the people out there who are complaining about it. It feels like a direct continuation of the Netflix series, but it also still feels like its own thing, and the pacing of the show feels so much more cohesive compared to the majority of the Marvel shows we've gotten in the past that didn't really have that television flow. This one really has time to breathe. It takes its time telling the story. It doesn't feel rushed. I am really digging it, and I'm really excited to talk about it in one of the next videos after this. And then as far as snacks go, I'm honestly not really much of a snack person. The last 2 years, I've been doing the keto diet, which is awesome in my opinion. It's one of the best health decisions I've ever made. But it is kind of restrictive and doesn't allow you much room for different snacks unless you want to buy those like overpriced garbage keto candy bars and whatnot at the grocery store that aren't even technically keto. They're kind of like dirty keto cheating. But if I do snack on something, it'll usually be like raw pecans or something like that. So yeah, nothing too fancy, but it works for me. And then moving on, the next one we have is $15 from Aaron. And this one says, hey Tay, it's Aaron. It's been a while, but I wanted to ask you some quick questions. 1. Any updates on a future Den of Nerds KindaCulty collab? 2. Any updates on merch? Would love to get a KindaCulty hoodie. 3. Do you think fans are being too hard on the MCU in its current state? I think we are living in a post-Endgame world where expectations are sky high and everyone thinks all of the films are going to be like Phase 3. I believe the current slate is more like Phases 1 and 2 as they figure out the next direction and are trying to live up to that hype and operating a bit in the shadows like at the end of the Infinity Saga. Do you agree with this? Keep doing your thing, Tay. Thanks for the great content. All right, first, merch. I'm working on it. Things have been so busy this month and I've had some complications, but it's coming along. I'm working on it. And as far as the Den of Nerds collab, I haven't talked to Josh in a while. I'm definitely still into doing that. You know, it's something that never came together in the past because I was always so busy. But I would definitely love to kind of move into doing some podcast stuff as well. And it's kind of funny, you know, one of the things that I would actually love to talk about or be able to talk about in addition to the comic book stuff is UFO and UAP topics and stuff like that. So I'd love to know what you guys actually think, your opinions on that, and if you would actually listen to that. Because, you know, on the channel, I've never talked very much about, like, my personal life or anything like that. And most of my life, I've lived in the city. And then because prices were getting so high after, you know, everything that happened in 2021, I ended up moving out into the middle of nowhere which happens to be right down the road from one of the biggest UFO paranormal hotspots in the entire country, or really the entire world. And it's been pretty crazy because I will admit that since I've lived out here, I have seen and even filmed some pretty crazy shit. And honestly, I've been interested in UFOs and UAPs for 15 years probably. But living out where I'm at now and seeing some of the stuff I've seen since I've been out here has definitely got me way more interested in it than I have been in the past. So yeah, let me know what you guys think if you would actually listen to something like that, or if you would just rather me stick to the comic book stuff. I mean, I'm always going to talk about the MCU and the comic book stuff, so it wouldn't take away from that. And then as far as your question of whether or not people have been too hard on the MCU in the past few years, I think it's been a little bit of both. I think there is definitely some trend hating that happens, but I also think there's definitely been a lot of valid criticism. And look, that valid criticism is a good thing to a degree because it helps Marvel Studios to knuckle down on that quality control and really making stuff as good as can be. And one complaint that I've heard that I think is a little bit unfair is when people say that Marvel Studios don't currently have a plan for the Multiverse Saga. And the reason I think that's a little bit unfair is because I definitely think there is a pretty clear plan, but the problem is that the plan mainly exists in those projects that are connected to the multiverse, like Loki, Deadpool and Wolverine, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and Spider-Man No Way Home. And because there's so many more projects in the Multiverse Saga than there was in the Infinity Saga, I think it's a lot harder for some people that aren't hardcore fans to see that plan playing out because it's not playing out in every project. And I do think that as we get into Phase 6, the quality control will go up because Marvel Studios really started to pivot and focus more on quality control back in early 2023. And as we get into Phase 6, everything that will be coming out will be completely made after that revamping period. So I do think that as we get into Phase 6, all of the movies are really going to focus and narrow in on just the multiverse stuff, and that everything will really start coming together just like what we saw back in Phase 3 with the Infinity Saga. So yeah, good question, Aaron. But yeah, I think that's it for the super thanks for today's video. But like I said, I do have 3 others from Steve James, Happy Dance 5003, and Negative Ozane 930 that are a bit on the longer side and are asking some questions about some Doctor Doom and Avengers Secret Wars stuff that I actually want to save for the next video that will come out in just a few days, because those super thanks tie directly into some of the stuff I'm going to discuss in that video. So yeah, I'm not forgetting about you guys. Just watch for those in the next video. And then to all of you watching, remember that if you would like to leave a super thanks with a question or a comment on this video, that those really help out a lot and that I will read and respond to those in the next video. And yeah, let's wrap it up for this one. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. Please leave a like, or even better, share the video if you enjoyed it, and subscribe to the channel if you are new here. And remember that I have a longer video coming out tomorrow or the next day that's going to really dig in deep on a whole bunch of Avengers Secret Wars stuff. So definitely keep an eye out for that, and make sure you have the bell clicked to always notify so you are notified when that video drops. And then lastly, don't forget to come follow the channel on Twitter for any updates or just to come say what's up. All right, cool. Thank you so much for watching, everyone, and I will see you in a day or two.